This is 44 Acres of Concrete, the Making of Headquarters Plaza, and I'm Kate McCabe. This is the second part of a two-part presentation, and this is the construction and completion of the project. The first part is recorded. It's on the library website, a different site. This talk was actually given on April 27th, 2025, but the recording didn't work out, so we're just recording this separately. There is nobody here in this room except for me, so you won't hear any audience response. So it's not that people are bored, is that they're actually just not even here. But that's great. I'm really glad that the library is allowing me to record this so that I can share it with people. They can share it with people because it's really a fascinating subject, and I am very excited to be doing this. The story of Headquarters Plaza, first of all, I'm Kate McCabe, and most of what I've found on the about the Headquarters Plaza project is up on Instagram at the Morristown Project. You can also reach out to me at ktlmccabe@gmail.com if you have any questions. I do need to say a huge disclaimer that this is all unrelated to the current owners of the Headquarters Plaza. Olnick and Fisher have nothing to do with the shenanigans that are going to be part of this presentation. The story is really about what happened before they arrived on the scene. And also, I absolutely have to give a huge thank you to James Lewis and his incredible team here at the library. I am so grateful for all of the work that they do preserving and protecting the documents that mark our history and allow us to retell it, piece it all together. To that end, I've spent the better part of the last 5 years researching this story. I have read through the Ray DeShera papers here at the library, the Emilio Gervasio papers, as well as the League of Women Voters archives. Those documents were not part of the first part of this presentation. They really come up in the second part because in the later part of the 1960s, there's this group of women in town, generally fairly affluent, diverse group of women who are highly educated and incredibly curious about what's going on in town. And for the most part, not a lot of them had jobs, and so they had a lot of time on their hands. So they spent time getting organized, educating themselves about different issues in town, and at some point they decided to create a schedule in which their members would attend the meetings of the planning board, town council, board of education, in both Morristown, Morris Plains, and Morris Township, and they would take notes of the meetings and they would send those notes in. Notes would be typed up and sent out to every member of the League of Women Voters as an observer report. And those women, like sitting in judgment in the back of these meeting rooms, like the Furies, they kept meticulous notes and were really wonderful. And they left behind this legacy of the accounts of all of these meetings, some of which didn't get into the papers. And so those were a tremendous resource. One of those women was Ann McCabe. And she lived in a house up the street from where I grew up on Farragut. And I interviewed her in 2020 about what life was like on Farragut Place. And she's really the reason why I got into this investigation and this story and this research, because she was convinced that there was organized crime involved in the construction of Headquarters Plaza. And she wasn't quite sure what it was. And I was like, I'll find out for you. And she had her sights in particular on Stanley Buglione, who was the town sanitarian, which is kind of like a health inspector. And he would check the delis to make sure the milk wasn't expired. He ran polio clinics. He published, reports about rates of STD infections. There's no qualification for a health inspector. Morristown hired him. He grew up in Newark. He hired him in 1957. But Anne had her sights on him. Now, she wasn't, an untrained observer. Her first job was with the CIA. And she was awaiting her assignment to a post in Cairo, from which she would be observing the activities of the Soviets in the Middle East. But the appointment didn't come through. fast enough. And so when her boyfriend proposed, she decided to get married instead and moved to Morristown, and they bought a house on Farragut Place. So Anne was so convinced that Stanley was a member of organized crime that she got herself a position on the Board of Health from which she could keep an eye on him. Her presence on that board, her questions, her curiosity, her incredible intelligence brought her the attention and the sort of respect of two of Morristown's most talented reporters, Tom Berrigan and Peter Sparber. And Berrigan and Sparber were like Woodward and Bernstein. They were crackerjack reporters. They asked a lot of questions. They put in a lot of time. They were both in their early 20s when this is all happening. They were an incredible team. So when this part of the story of headquarters, in this part of the story of Headquarters Plaza, in part one, we talked a lot about the concerns that people had, that the people had who lived on the north side of town. And in this part, there's going to be a little bit more focus on the folks on the south side of town. And the two people who were the real champions of the project, Mayor E. Marco Sterone, who, after he's mayor, he's still associated with the project. He's like the town attorney. He's the attorney for urban renewal. He's on the scene for a long time. And Ray DeShera, he's one of the leaders of the project. Ray DeShera is the urban renewal executive director, with it from its inception to its completion. Marco Sterone described the criticism that they got from the south side of town as coming from the silk stocking district. And he said the silk stockings thought there was something crooked, and they often had the time, money, and education to study the proposal and air their suspicions. So that's really the sort of tension involved in this part of the story. The story gets ridiculously out of hand. It goes utterly off the rails. And so one way to frame it, or one thing I thought would be good to frame it, is the fact that there are 18 trials in 13 years. I'm not going to go into every trial minute by minute. I'm not going to go TikTok through all of the different witnesses and all of that. But I wanted to use this as kind of like a timeline, so that you're almost a checklist, so that you could know that where we're at in the story. Through this presentation, in the top right corner, you'll see a number which will indicate which trial we're on. So you have so you know that we're getting somewhere. But let's begin. And we begin in 1971. So 1971 marks the groundbreaking ceremony. And these are photos from the Ray DeShera papers here. This is Ray DeShera on the left. This is a really optimistic, very hopeful time in town. I believe the man on the right is an official from the bank that was helping to finance the proposal. This is another photograph from the groundbreaking ceremony. Ray DeShera is speaking. Harrison Williams, the senator who's later involved in Abscam, is to his left, and then Marco Sterone is to his left. So this is it's a cold spring day in April. People are excited and optimistic. You can see that the buildings are gone. All of the houses and buildings are gone from the site. The town erected a fence around the Speedwell Avenue construction site. They had school children paint murals on the boards. There's cutouts. I think you can see in this photograph, there's cutouts at different heights, so you can see what's happening in the construction site. Very optimistic. Look, we're building tomorrow. These folks across the street are maybe not quite as optimistic. They're a little skeptical about what's going on. I love this photograph. It's just an absolute wonderful document about the history of Morristown. Some of their skepticism might have been related to the fact that in the spring of 1971, even though we're 6 years into the project, right? It was unveiled in 1965. 6 years in, there's still not a lot of clarity around what's going to be built or who's going to pay for it. And there's no money. So that's a challenge. The first step, almost immediately after the groundbreaking ceremony, is the town decides it's going to borrow some money. I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds on this one, and I apologize, but I'm not going to do this with everyone. I just want to explain. I think this part of the story is illustrative of it illustrates how frustrated the folks in the silk stockings were getting, and what may have set them off. So the town needs money, and it's going to borrow some money. At the time, there was a process through which the town could borrow money. And at first, the town council had to pass a resolution. Then 20 days had to pass where people could comment or ask questions. After those 20 days were over, the town would pass an ordinance saying we're going to borrow some money. They'd turn to Dot Johnson, who was the town treasurer, and ask, authorize her to go seek multiple bids from different banks. She would get the best interest rate, the best terms of repayment, the lowest fees. Once that was approved, she would go and, authorize that loan and then get the money and put it in a town-approved bank. Very orderly process, very important that the steps were followed. In May of 1971, the steps were not followed. A resolution was passed, but none of the other steps were followed. Ray DeShera, the executive director of Urban Renewal, and the lawyer for the organization, went to a bank in Newark with the resolution and borrowed the money and put the money in a bank in Newark. Dot Johnson gets wind of this. She tries to call Ray DeShera to say, where's the money? She doesn't immediately get a response. Word gets out. Sparber and Berrigan find out about it, and they publish an article in the Daily Record with a full 5-column headline, where's the $500,000? Their response, enraged people. You can see in that article on the right, tempers very hot at plan meeting. The article, mayor promises full accounting of the $500,000. The $500,000 has arrived. DeShera won't comment on how it all happened. Nothing, it's very important to note, no money was stolen. No money was missing. There is nothing, no accusation of theft is associated with this. Were the rules followed? No. Were there competitive bids for the loan? No. Is it clear that they didn't get the best possible deal? No. They could have gotten the best possible deal. It's hard to say, impossible to say. This kerfuffle is our first lawsuit because Ray DeShera sues Tom Berrigan and the Daily Record for libel. We're going to get back to this case in a little bit, so stick a pin in it, but this is our first lawsuit. Regardless, the money is there. The $500,000 has arrived, and the town is going to take some of that money and pay for a feasibility study in which they would get an accounting of what they could build, how much it would cost, how long it might take, right? And they ask the town engineer, Bernie Shaw, to supervise that process. He finds a firm, they do the feasibility study, they send it back to him, and he refuses to turn it over. He said it's going to blow the lid off this town if anyone finds out about how much money this project is going to cost. Little background on Bernie Shaw. He was the town engineer. He was more of a consultant than an employee. He had jobs all over the country. One of his major jobs was in Miami, where he was hired to build a 5-story addition to the Fontainebleau Hotel. The Fontainebleau Hotel still exists. It's still a really nice place. Back in the day, it was super swanky. It might still be, I don't know. And it was the hotspot for members of organized crime. So much so that the FBI just planted agents in the lobby just so they could see who was in town. The Fontainebleau was the site of part of Goldfinger. The James Bond film was filmed there. Frank Sinatra used to play there, perform there. And Bernie Shaw was, this is a plum assignment to be hired to build an addition to this building. Unfortunately for Bernie Shaw, in 1969, the 5-story addition he was supervising collapsed to the ground. Nobody was hurt, thankfully, but Florida started an investigation in which they were examining whether Bernie Shaw should be allowed to be practicing engineering. But he's our town engineer for this project. So he gets this estimate, and he's not turning it over. When he finally does, it is $21 million, which in today's dollars is $178 million, which is an enormous amount of money for any town to take on as a debt, because they would have to borrow this money because they don't have it. So that's an extraordinary amount of money that Morristown would have had to borrow to build this. This causes some tension between Bernie Shaw and Ray DeShera. The two of them are not getting along in the summer of 1971. The town decides, because they've lost confidence in Bernie Shaw, to hire a new construction company, a new engineering firm called Porter and Ripa. And Porter and Ripa does not replace Bernie Shaw. They're hired to sort of do the same job as Bernie Shaw. There's items in their contract which overlap with the items in Bernie Shaw's contract, which doesn't make Bernie Shaw very happy at all. So there's more tension added into the mix. But construction is progressing. The hole has been excavated, and you can see from this picture that the enormous hole for the project butts up against the Presbyterian Church graveyard. And in August of 1971, Tropical Storm Doria rolls into town and dumps 7 inches of rain on the construction site. This leads to an absolutely catastrophic level of flooding in the hollow. People have 6 feet of water in their homes. 100 people are sleeping at the neighborhood house. They're having their meals at Calvary Baptist Church. They're desperate to try to find housing. The American Red Cross comes in to try to help these people who have been displaced by this storm. They can't find housing for them. The American Red Cross is horrified that no one in town will rent to these people or give them a place to stay. It goes into September. Schools started. When schools started, people who couldn't find any housing in Morristown, who are living in Boonton, have to be bused to town in order for their kids to start school. So it's an absolute catastrophe. And in the middle of that, Anthony Tartaglia, who is the head of the Board of Health, notices that and others noticed as well, obviously, that the side of the construction site butting up against the Presbyterian Church graveyard has collapsed. And the skeletons and bodies have fallen out of the graveyard into the pit. So this photograph in the center of this slide is from the Daily Record. It's folks from Public Works picking up the bodies, picking up the bones from the construction site in order for those remains to be reburied. This doesn't help Shaw's case. So tension builds, and Bernie Shaw and Ray DeShera finally have it out. Absolute screaming match at a town council meeting. And it just so happened that one of the League of Women Voters observer who was at that meeting was none other than Ann McCabe. So she not only sends in her notes to the League and submits her report, she also writes a letter to the editor in which she says, something was in the air all evening. There was a staggering lack of decorum, vituperative asides and remarks, and the lashing out at one another egomaniacal self-protection come theatrical abandon of Alderman and Mr. Teixeira. Skinny Marinkies, it was more than the aghast onlookers could believe. She said, go wash your mouths out with soap, boys. And then she said, the town leaders should stop blinding themselves to this inconvenient reality. People do seriously question the financial facts surrounding this project, and rightly so, for we will be footing the bill one way or the other. She concluded by saying Morristown deserves better. Ultimately, this ends with Ray Teixeira saying it's him or me. Either fire me or fire Bernie Shaw. And the town decides to fire Bernie Shaw. They have Porter and Ripa in place, so Porter and Ripa becomes the town engineer. Bernie Shaw sues the town. This is case number 2. Sues the town for the unpaid part of his contract, for breach of contract, all kinds of things. He eventually is paid for his work, or I should say that his estate was paid because about 2 months after this, he drops dead of a heart attack. And the project continues. All of this is covered in the reporting of Berrigan and Sparber, and they do a lot of digging. They dig into the receipts for that are paid for the work done on the urban renewal site. They publish an article in which they say that they found that all of the electrical work for the job was all of the electrical contracts were given to one firm with ties to the Democratic Party. All of the plumbing contracts were given to another firm with ties to the Democratic Party. One of the demolition firms is paid for work on a day when the town was, socked with 13 inches of snow, so none of the roads were open, so how could anybody possibly have been working that day? And their reporting gets the attention of the state police. And the state police come in and they do an investigation to see what's going on in Morristown. This investigation is a little rudimentary, and the technology's not great. I should say the investigation was probably fine, but the technology wasn't great. So much so that in one interview where an investigator is wearing a wire, the wire malfunctions, and in a very small office, the person wearing the wire starts to feel their chest burning because this wire is burning into him, and then starts like the whole room starts to fill with the smell of burning flesh and burning hair, and so the interviewer has to run out. So the technology wasn't what we have today. Anyway, the state police zero in on the hole, and in particular the fact that the fill from the hole is disappearing, or it's being sold, or it's being stolen. They don't know, but they know that there are reports that fill is going without proper authorization. They eventually arrest Stanley Buglione for stealing the dirt. He's on trial 3 different times. There's no question that he sold the dirt, right? They have they have testimony from the people who paid him for dirt. They have testimony from truck drivers who said, I filled my truck up with dirt and Stanley helped me. They have canceled checks because he paid for things. He asked people to pay him in checks. He had opened fake bank accounts. He had used false names. He had done all of these things, and the state had its case laid out. They had him dead to rights. Stanley's defense was not that he didn't steal the dirt, he didn't sell the dirt. His defense was that Morristown didn't own the dirt. And so how could he be charged with stealing from Morristown if Morristown didn't own the dirt? His argument was that the developer actually owned the dirt, and the developer, just so happens, couldn't make it the day he was supposed to testify in court. Like I said, there's 3 trials for Stanley stealing the dirt. In the first case, the case is coming to a close, and one of the prosecutors runs into Stanley in the hallway during a break, and he basically says, why are you doing this? Why don't you take the fall for why don't you turn on the guys ahead of you, above you in this organization? Why are you taking the fall for them? Stanley tells the judge this is a threat. He feels threatened. He feels unsafe. He starts having chest pains, has to be rushed to the hospital. Mistrial. So the first trial ends in a mistrial. The second trial starts, and the judge sort of already knows what Stanley's going to say. Already knows that Stanley's going to say, the town didn't own the dirt. So the judge immediately, he starts the case. He says, the town owns the dirt. I don't want to hear it. Let's see what the evidence says. The jury comes back and is like, we're not sure the town owns the dirt. So hung jury, that's case number 2. In the third trial, before it even starts, the judge says, the town has failed to prove that it owns the dirt. Stanley's free to go. Throughout all of this, Stanley is still employed by the town. He's still the town sanitarian. He wasn't convicted of a crime, innocent until proven guilty, so he's still working for the town. As you can imagine, there's a lot of shenanigans, right? And so there's a lot of newspaper articles. There's a lot of attention. When I asked, Peter Sparber and Tom Berrigan earned the New Jersey Press Award in 1971. It's given to them at the Playboy Club up in Vernon, New Jersey, because of course that's where this would happen. They really are able. They sell a lot of newspapers. They're given license to write satirical pieces in the Daily Record. Berrigan writes one like Urban Renewal Think Anyone, with a very, critiquing and lampooning the various estimates for how many cars are going to be in the parking garage, what it's going to cost, the sort of nonsense of that. Peter Sparber writes an article in which he sort of talks about Morristown, a game for the smart set, where he teases, he sort of does a sort of send up of the folks at their happy hours where they, one of them starts, Morristown, a game for the smart set. The endless series of charades were over. The drinks were drunk. The wives were finished talking about their husbands, and the husbands were finished talking about their rounds of golf. The exchange goes on. An exchange was greeted with laughter. The game of Morristown was on. Then there's this piece, Speedwell Source of Amusement. This is one of my favorites. Peter Sparber suggests that they scrap the idea for a parking garage in a mall and they just turn it into an amusement park and use the parking garage as a stable for ponies, and they can give pony rides around the green. Speedwell Source of Amusement. They must have obviously had the support of the editors of the Daily Record and the publishers in order to be given license to print all of these articles. In September 24th of 1971, the editors write this piece, Fresh Start Needed, and it sort of lays bare their view of the whole project. It says, they wrote, when we first began pressing for revitalization of the sagging Speedwell Avenue business district, we believed, and still believe, that it is vital to Morristown's future. We assumed the delays to be just another instance of the apathy and indecisiveness characteristic of Morristown's succession of mayors and aldermen. As news of each new foul-up was wrested from beneath the clenched teeth of the aldermen and urban renewal officials, the chilling realization dawned that these were not just isolated snags in the orderly progression of an important project. Instead, each new chapter moved inexorably toward the completion of a masterful movie scenario, which could variously be titled The Monster That Devoured Speedwell Avenue, Who's Minding the $500,000, The Phantom of the Firehouse, The Day the Town Stood Still, or The Marx Brothers Built a Parking Garage. They go on to say, every citizen of Morristown, if he cares about his own future and the future of his town, should rise up in outrage. And the town's officials must cease immediately their pathetic defense of the project and acknowledge the fact that they have unwittingly imperiled the town they were elected to serve. Then we must all make a fresh start before that 11.6-acre hole in the heart of the town reaches out and drags the rest of Morristown with it into oblivion. Perhaps a little bit over the top. Like I said, we got back to this libel suit. Ray DeShera sues the Daily Record and Tom Berrigan in particular for libel. I've spoken with people on both sides of this case, and there's still, 50 years later, a lot of emotion, a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of confusion and pain connected with this suit. It ultimately doesn't end in a conviction. It goes to trial, but about halfway through, they decide to settle the case. Ray DeShera drops the case. In exchange, the Daily Record moves Tom Berrigan off of town affairs off the town hall beat. Berrigan and Sparber leave town not long after that, go on to careers in public relations. And we're at 1974. The major event in 1974 involves Lester Dworman, the developer. And he's not a Morristown guy. He's from New York. He is attached to the project from the beginning. I haven't been able to find much beyond a story about how somehow Lester Dworman and E. Marcus Sterone were talking. I don't know where, I don't know when, I don't know how they met each other. But Sterone was saying that there was this section of town that he wanted to do something with, and he wasn't sure what to do with it. And Dworman suggested, well, build a parking garage and put a mall on top of it. And Sterone said, perfect, that's amazing, let's do it. And from that point on, Lester Dworman was the developer. I haven't found any evidence of competitive bidding. I haven't found any evidence that other people had other suggestions. Perhaps there was. I don't know. I haven't found it. Lester Dworman, like I said, was based in New York. He built some buildings, some office buildings. He had a brother, Alvin Dworman, who's much more successful, much more accomplished developer. But Lester still, was in the same game. And when Dworman signs a contract with the town, it has a lot of really complicated provisions, but basically, once 1776 was partially built, the town would promise to build a parking garage just for the people who worked in that building. It's not the parking garage that would eventually go under the mall, that would eventually go under Headquarters Plaza. It's a separate parking garage with space for 300 cars. You can tell from this that the building goes up. There's no real evidence that there's any, parking garage being built. And part of that has to do with the opposition that has grown up in town around the project. And Anthony Catano is mayor in the early part of the 1970s, and he was generally in favor of the project, but so many people had criticisms of it, that he appointed a blue ribbon panel with an architect, the former school superintendent, engineer, retired Superior Court judge, and he asked them to sort of, study the project and issue a report. And that blue ribbon panel said that the project appeared to have been initiated on intuitive feelings rather than on solid planning. They noted that there were not adequate market surveys or long-range planning. Construction plans were neither feasible nor realistic. They said the project should go forward. I mean, obviously there's already that big hole in the ground, so what are you going to do? But they do sort of have a critical report. Following Tony Catano's time as mayor, Emilio Gervasio runs for mayor, and he wins and serves in 1973. He only serves one term because the government of the town goes from being alderman to council, and in that process, he only has a one-year term. He is dead set against urban renewal. He said it's a project motivated by political expediency and intuitive feeling rather than constructive planning, total disregard and arrogance displayed by elected officials and their failure to respond to the expertise of the Blue Ribbon Panel. He cites soaring taxes with poor planning, excessive spending, waste and unsound fiscal policies, spelling high cost to property owners, high rents to tenants, and high cost to the business community. Like, he's not a fan. He's absolutely not a fan. And he refuses to follow the terms of the contract, or he refuses to authorize, continued construction on the contract. And so by 1974, again, there is no 300-car garage. Dworman then sues the town for failing to live up to its portion, its part of the bargain, and he wins $2.5 million. What's curious about the case is, and the judge even remarked on this, Judge Lacey, that Dworman didn't want to be like severed from the project. He didn't want to be released from his obligations. He wanted the judge to force the town to build the garage and to force the town to give him the contract for the rest of the project and to force and to exempt the town from any competitive bidding. And the judge was like, I can't do any of that. So Morristown has to pay Dworman $2.5 million, which it doesn't have. It has to borrow that. But they're excited because they agree that he will be the developer for the rest of the project. The town council in 1974 is led by David Edwards, seated in this picture. He is the son of Jane Edwards, who is our hero from part 1. Behind him is B. Jenkins, who was the lead plaintiff in the court case that created the Moore School District. Donnie Crescitello is to her right. Other aldermen is Paul Hoyt, Ted Goodman, Basil McCabe, Thomas Zennick. Just a phenomenal collection of leaders. And they, along with Mayor David Manahan, try to spin this $2.5 million loss as a win because Dworman had been asking for like $7 million. So they're like, wow, we saved $4.5 million, right? It's all about the spin. Anyway, here they are, Donnie Crescitello, David Edwards, Ray DeSher, Dave Manahan, and B. Jenkins, looking at the new plans for the construction at on Speedwell Avenue. The plan is for a mall. This is just ghastly. There's no other word for it. But again, nothing facing the north, even though it looks sort of monolithic from the outside, from the inside, from the front, or from the south side of town, I should say. There's this lovely public space, fountains, umbrellas, looks lovely. Inside, there's going to be this open air concept for the mall. I don't know how you have a mall with no walls, but that was the idea. There was going to be a revolulator where you could see and be seen as these platforms rotated from one floor to the next. There was going to be, this is innovative, a staircase from the north side of town. I question the artist's decision to have this adult figure pulling the child by their shirt, but at least there is some acknowledgement that there are people living on the north side of town and that they might want to access the mall. So there's a staircase for them to use to get into it. On top of that, there will be buildings. There will be office buildings, a hotel, and this is all you can see there in the foreground, going to be called the Green Park Center. Again, this is 1974. Meanwhile, our friend Stanley, again, had been employed by the town up until this point. He's arrested and sent to jail for 4 separate schemes. First off, starting sort of counterclockwise from starting clockwise from 7 o'clock on the clock face. He's arrested for trying to rig the bids for garbage trucks that the town of Dover was trying to sell. Above that, there's a map of Dover. They were doing a tax reevaluation. Stanley wanted the contract for the reevaluation work to go to one of his buddies. He tried to bribe the town officials to get it to his friends. The upper right, he was prosecuted for selling hookups to the sewer system. He would bribe people accepting their payments with bags of cash when he was hanging out at the Morristown Diner. Then sort of keep going around the clock face, the All Souls Hospital, which is what it looked like before they put that building in the front of it. Since Stanley was the town sanitarian, he was responsible for making sure that they were following proper hygienic procedures. And he told the leaders of All Souls Hospital that if they didn't use his buddies as their waste management company, then he would shut them down for failing to follow health codes. So he tried to shake down All Souls Hospital. He goes to jail for all of these, but he does it in 2 different stints. He goes to jail for the first 2 for a couple years, and then he's let out of jail just in time to be sent back for the other 2. And when he's sentenced for the other 2, he's sentenced by Judge Reginald Stanton, who told Buglione, "You viewed public office as an opportunity to extort money and line your pockets corruptly. It bespeaks of the evil into which you have fallen. You were routinely willing to commit this act because you regard it as part of the routine procedure." Stanton said he hoped Buglione's sentence would send a message to the fairly large number of corrupt public officials in New Jersey. And Buglione does not take this well. He breaks down crying. He told the judge, "I was a wheeler and dealer. That was my view of life. That's what I wanted to do." He said he had disgraced everyone dear to me. He said he didn't want to go back to prison, that he'd had enough of the lonely days and nights and the frustration. But then he also told the judge, "It's difficult to say I won't commit another crime." So Stanton sent him back to jail. And that gets us all the way to 1977. So in 1977, the plan was, Porter and Ripa's still on the job. They're still helping with the engineering of the construction in town. They work at the airport, they're working on Speedwell Avenue, and they're also hired to build the Pocahontas Parkway, which was supposed to be, and was never built, a 4-lane highway above the hollow, right? You can see its routes like between like Patriots Path and the railroad. And so it is never built, like I said, but it was intended to alleviate some of the traffic caused by Speedwell Avenue construction. And this is all well and good, except Porter and Ripa in 1977 is indicted by the state of New Jersey for overbilling the Camden County Municipal Authority. When that happens, the town of Morristown decides to audit all of the contracts that were given to Porter and Ripa. And the audit comes back, and it says that Porter and Ripa had billed the town for more than $500,000 in work on the urban renewal and parking garage project, for which auditors can find no written evidence of authorization by local officials. Most of that had to do with the dispute between Porter and Ripa and Shaw, where they both were working on the same jobs, and the lawsuit that Shaw's estate won sort of identified which work he had done and paid him for it, but then Porter and Ripa billed the town for that work anyway. So that's a huge overpayment. There was a contract with a maximum fee of $420,000, but the town paid $476,000. There was a contract that should have been paid at $171,000. The town paid $192,000. There were other random smaller overpayments, and then the state of New Jersey, Department of Housing and Urban Development also decided to audit the Speedwell Avenue Urban Renewal Program, and the Inspector General concluded that Morristown had misused between $500,000 and $1.2 million between November 1974 and December 1978. While all that is going on, if you remember back to part one of the major concerns was that the housing in the hollow wasn't fit for human habitation. Some things were addressed, other things had not been addressed. There was a lot of garbage being dumped in the hollow. There were people just dropping off used appliances. There was a junkyard there, but this was separate. This was random areas around Pocahontas Lake. And by 1977, one of the biggest problems that was plaguing the entire town, but in particular the area around the river, was an infestation of rats. So while the town has all this money going all these different directions, there is an opportunity to maybe perhaps do something about the rats. And the town could have done a lot of different things, including getting, better garbage management of the garbage, cleaning up the area, getting exterminators, all kinds of things. But instead, the town decides that they are going to bring in owls. They get owls from different parts of the state. They put them in a barn in town. They take them out on little field trips, walking them down to the hollow to show them where the rats live, and then putting them back in the barn. July 30th, 1977 was designated R Day for rat, R for rat. That's the day that they stopped feeding them a couple days before. They were going to have, the town imagined that they would have this, gaggle of, this collection of really hungry owls that would go after the rats immediately. They get a crowd of people together, standing outside of the barn. They open the barn doors, expecting like this whoosh of owls, or, beginning their hunt. Nothing happens. The people stand there. There's no whoosh. There's no owls. There's nothing. After a while, people just go home. They leave the barn doors open, thinking maybe the owls got shy or whatever. The owls eventually fly away, and they're never seen again. And then Dwarman goes bankrupt. He didn't have the money to finish the project. That comes down in the middle of 1976. The town has to start all over again. They need to find somebody to build the project. There's a lawsuit. The reason why this is case number 12 is because there's a lot of litigation around who owed money to whom and who owned 1776 and who was going to be responsible for the debts incurred. And so nothing can really proceed until that's all settled. But once it does, the town then solicits bids for something to fill the site. And so there's a couple different proposals. One is from Marvin Klein, who proposed this collection of buildings. There's office buildings, there's some high rises, there's some low rise pavilions. The buildings in the background there, those 5 office buildings or 6 office buildings, those aren't part of the project. He was just projecting that the business district would continue to grow into the north part of town, obviously eliminating everything that was there and still is there. This was not the winning bid. The winning bid was put forth by Briscoe Construction, financed by Prudential, or, it was Prudential's idea and they had a construction company attached to it. This was the one that won. The elevation, this is from the north side of town. This is what it would look like from the north side of town. It has a terraced parking garage, and so it is a little bit less severe than the wall that's there now. There's landscaping, so it was somewhat green. There's a staircase or escalator or something for folks in the north side of town to get up to the street level. And there's office buildings. And like I said, this won. However, like a month after they were awarded the bid, Prudential came back and said, we can't make any money at this, and so they backed out, leaving the town with its number 2 choice, which was Olnick & Fisher. And this was their plan for what they were going to build, a huge sort of promenade, public area, then office buildings, a hotel, enormous mall. There's actually, if you can see in the foreground, there's a pedestrian walkway over Speedwell Avenue. That is not obviously what they ended up building, but that's the winning bid. And this is like 1978. The financing, the town still was connected to the federal government and still had access to grants from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So some of that money was helped to pay for the cost of building the parking garage. The town borrows money and gives it to Olnick & Fisher to pay for the construction. Olnick & Fisher pays the town back the cost of whatever they were lent. And so the entire HQ Plaza now is privately owned. The parking garage is privately owned. It's not part of the Morristown Parking Authority. There was some public financing of it, obviously public financing of the destruction of everything that was there, the demolition of all of those buildings, but it's a private private enterprise and like, again, removed from the shenanigans of the rest of the project. They had nothing to do with the owls. But the story's not done, because our boy Stanley, apparently, as the story goes, when he is sentenced to prison for the second time, he meets up with his childhood friend, Nicholas Nicky Boy Valvano. I've also seen it that they were lifelong friends. So either way, by the time they get out of prison, they are collaborating on an enterprise called Concern for the Handicapped. It is not an organization for people with developmental disabilities. We'll get to that in a second. They are working with and under the sort of auspices or sort of the sort of umbrella of Dominic Tommy Adams DeNorcio, who was a lieutenant in the Bruno crime family. Nicholas had been associated with DeNorcio for a long time. Through all of the escapades that Valvano, took part in, I haven't seen Buglione's name associated with a lot of that, but that's before Buglione goes to prison. After he gets out of prison, they're definitely in cahoots, and it all comes to a head on November 22nd, 1983, where federal agents from the DEA spread out around 22 locations in New Jersey and New York. They arrest 40 people, confiscate 30 weapons, including an Uzi machine gun, ammunition, a cache of drugs, and $30,000 cash. Operating out of a former social club on Davenport Avenue in Newark, Concern for the Handicapped was actually an operation that purchased methamphetamine and methaqualone in various states and sold an estimated $150,000 a week in narcotics to drug suppliers. The Stanley Buglione was charged with organizing, managing, and supervising a continuing criminal enterprise. His 19-count indictment included charges of possessing and distributing methamphetamine and cocaine, possessing diazepam, possessing weapons while a convicted felon. He had both a .25 caliber and .357 revolver that were confiscated during the raid. If convicted, the charges he faced brought a mandatory 10-year sentence, possible life sentence, and $645,000 in fines. Stanley considers his options and decides to turn state's evidence. And he testifies in a series of cases. He testified that when Catano Jewelers was robbed in 1983, that he helped to organize it, and he was the lookout man. When Carmine Lunetta was prosecuted for selling stolen bearer bonds, Stanley Buglione was the one who had provided them. He was part of a burglary at the home of a murdered Colombian drug lord, possibly one of the people providing Concern for the Handicapped with their supply of drugs. Fascinatingly, as part of this takedown of Stanley Buglione, Ann McDade, who by this point had become a detective in the prosecutor's office, wore a wire as part of the investigation, so she got her man. And then Buglione testifies in a case in which he alleged that Daniel Moylan, the supervisor of the sewer plant in Morristown, was taking money in kickbacks, like illegal kickbacks. He was padding contracts for waste management companies. And all of this accusations that were levied at Moylan, Moylan is acquitted. He's found innocent. Moylan takes the attention from the trial and the press coverage of the trial to draw, to sort of make everyone aware of the fact that the sewer system is ridiculously overloaded, and that there needs to be an upgrade. That doesn't happen right away, but if you remember from part one, the mill pond, part of the reason why the area was blighted perhaps to begin with, was this mill pond running through the center of the area of the construction site. And when the town originally set up its, sewage disposal network, they allowed for overrun to go from the sewer pipes in the Headquarters Plaza complex into the stream that ran underneath it. And, in extreme cases, have the overflow go into the Whippany River. But that design for the sewer hookup for the site was submitted in 1974 when the plan for the site was just a mall. And when the plan changed from being a parking garage and a mall with maybe 1 or 2 office buildings to 4 office buildings, a hotel, and a mall, they didn't upgrade the sewer plan. So instead of having sewage, runoff go into the Whippany River in extreme cases, it happened once, if not twice a day. Like hundreds of pounds of raw sewage was being dumped into the Whippany River on a consistent basis. And eventually the town of Hanover sues Morristown, and Morristown has to build a new sewer plant at the cost of $63 million. So, and there's some drama around this because the system was so overloaded that at one point, Bennigan's was struggling to get a certificate of occupancy because the sewers weren't connected properly or their sewers weren't sufficient. And Bennigan's had to open or the food court would be useless. I remember having dinner at Bennigan's. Anyway, so that is most of the story. I can't end without also including mention of the Goldier's Junkyard, which over time became the repository for transformers from the electrical company, and the PCBs from those transformers leached into the soil. These photographs in the top row are here at the library of what the junkyard looked like, or had come to look like. And then that second row is from the report of the cleanup of the site. And if you can see that picture in the bottom middle, there's a full black circle that says 0 to 8. And if you look at the explanation of that, a full black circle means that site has 100 to 1,000 times the action level of PCB contamination. So this site is eventually cleaned up in the early 2000s. The bottom right there is a picture of the well in the parking lot where Table of Hope conducts its food pantry. They're still monitoring, or at least a couple years ago when I was volunteering, somebody was there testing the water to see if the contaminants had reached that far away from the original site. This was something that David Edwards complained about in the protest in 1965. It was eventually cleaned up 37 years later. So the story of the Headquarters Plaza is remarkable, and I always, whenever I talk to people from Morristown, people have opinions. There's a lot of emotions connected to it. It is a truly fascinating story. One of the things that I have come to understand about it, and the one thing that is one of the sort of the lessons that I've learned from it, is that, and I'm not the person who came up with this, it's just the saying of budgets are moral documents, right? What we spend money on is what we value. And sometimes when you're talking about governance, what you value means who you value. And so there's no, the other thing that I learned is that there's no real villains in this story. Everybody, I think, was trying to do their best. Everybody was trying to do what they felt was best for Morristown. They, everybody connected to this, absolutely loves this town. So it's just a fascinating tale. Thanks for listening.